Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to Shop Talk. I'm joined by my co-host Glenn tonight to answer a long list of interesting viewer questions. How are you doing, Glenn?
I'm doing well tonight, David.
Good to hear it. I thought I'd start off with an anecdote that I don't think I've ever mentioned in an episode. It was back in the spring of '94, just a month or two after starting full-time at Microsoft, and I was working on Ole.com where I was responsible for the presentation cache. That meant that when you inserted an Excel spreadsheet into Word, for example, Ole would draw a cached version of the embedded spreadsheet rather than actually loading and invoking Excel to do the drawing. I was in the midst of adding support for enhanced metafiles to it when I ran into some weird cross-process deadlock in the Win95 scheduler down in the kernel. Even though I was ostensibly on the Windows NT team, the Ole group delivered our code to Windows 95 as well, so it actually wound up in both products. The thing is, I wasn't just new to Microsoft, I was new to Windows itself, because I'd been an Amiga fan and programmer, and so really had no past experience coding for Windows. So when I found myself knee-deep in the Windows 95 kernel, I have to admit I was a little bit lost. And that's when I decided that discretion, being the better part of valor, I should probably have somebody from the Windows 95 kernel team lend a hand. So I sent off an email and waited for a response. And sure enough, a few minutes later, one of their top developers strolled into my office carrying a serial cable and a null modem adapter, just in case I didn't have the needed one to connect the debugger. They got WinDebug set up the way they liked it, and then they got busy. WinDebug is a fairly powerful debugger, but it's more than a little arcane. Let's just say it's a wrapper around a console debugger, and it's pretty far from Visual Studio. But in the hands of a developer like this who's really proficient with it, it was something like watching an old gray-bearded wizard use the VI editor. As I watched, and they used the debugger to jump from context to context, inspecting the call stack, seeing what each thread was waiting on, and then tracing that object back to see who held it, and so on. It was a masterful performance, something I had seen more of over the years, but unlike anything that I had seen before. Stuff flew by on the screen faster than I could even note it sometimes, and their hands were just a blur on the keyboard. It was like the developer had briefly become one with the machine, extracting its secrets. And then there was a pause, and then a simple, oh, okay. Whatever it was, they'd apparently found it. The developer stood up and explained that this was already a known deadlock situation, that a fix was in the works to be checked in the next few days, so it was okay to reboot. And with that, she turned and left. And that was my first exposure to Laura Butler, one of the very few female developers that we had on the team. Laura would actually go on to become Microsoft's first female technical fellow. And those first 20 minutes were formative for me on two fronts. First, it served to underscore how little I personally knew about the internal workings of Windows at the time, and two, it meant that Laura, as the first and so far only example of what a female Microsoft developer would be like, would serve as my mental reference for female developer for quite some time. I'd go on to work with other female developers like Julie B on the Shell team, but they were generally few and far between. I'd guess that less than 5% of our developers were female at the time, but that's just a guess. Perhaps that means that my sample size is just too small, but in my experience, if I can go way out on a limb here, it seemed like the average female developer was generally well above average. And I've always wondered why that was. And so allow me to mansplain it as best that I can. My speculation is that just wanting to be an operating system developer at Microsoft in the 90s meant you were already pretty hardcore. But women faced several unique factors, I think. I think one significant factor was likely the higher barrier to entry for women in tech at the time in general. Because the tech industry, especially back in the 90s, was at least heavily male-dominated, and women often faced systemic challenges like stereotypes, and it's hard to find a mentor, and there are just fewer opportunities. Those who did manage to break through were likely to already have been particularly determined, resilient, and talented. So the difficulty of overcoming these hurdles meant that only the most hardcore women pursued and succeeded in the roles. Women who chose to enter such a male-dominated field might have been a self-selecting group of particularly motivated individuals with a strong passion for programming and technology. Many may have felt that they had something to prove, leading them to work harder and develop sharper skills. Women in male-dominated industries often develop strong adaptability and problem-solving skills as they frequently have to navigate more obstacles than their male counterparts. So maybe the steeper climb makes them super fit by the time they get to the top. And that was my first experience with a female developer at Microsoft. And of course, over the years, that pool of people grew quite a bit. But in the early years, it was fairly uncommon. All right, Glenn, from the pre-list that I saw, it looked like you had quite a stack of questions. So why don't we start burning through some of those?
Sure. And I think, again, for me, it helps, and I don't know if it helps others, but I sort of grouped them by the video source that they come from. So we're going to start with your $50 language model.
Okay.
So VSL Computers says, thank you for the video. Can I ask what the benefit of running a local LLM would be?
Well, cost is one, but that's pretty small because you can get access to ChatGPT for $20 a month. So it's not immaterial, but you're not saving a lot by doing it. The two other big factors are that you can load and easily train it with your own data, which is an episode I'm going to work on doing pretty shortly to explain how to do it, because there are a couple ways to do it. And you don't necessarily have the same guardrails, and the models aren't as restricted necessarily. And it depends who makes the model, but you can certainly get models that aren't as restricted and won't have whatever biases and programming that they put in to constrain the model to a particular type of thought, for example.
Cool.
So more freedom, more flexibility, cheaper
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah. There's a few benefits, eh? Feed the chunk. So how long before you get it running on the PDP-11?
Yeah, it's not going to run. I got Eliza running on the PDP-11, so that's about as close as you can get to an interactive talking experience. But it works. So
Yeah, we can dream. It'll still never happen, but we can dream.
right.
Paul Laddie. Hey, Dave, once you've downloaded the model and been giving it queries, does it need to be connected to the internet? Like, is it pulling data from the internet to answer your queries?
No, it's fully offline. At least I was able to turn off my Wi-Fi on my laptop, which wasn't otherwise plugged in, and use it, and that worked. So
Okay,
I
and
can't.
Red Dirt.
I
Oh,
should
go
say I
ahead.
can't promise that it doesn't contact the internet at any time, but it didn't seem to need to. So I'm assuming that it doesn't. But that's an assumption.
So even on what's the lowest model? 8 billion?
No, you can get models as low as 1 billion parameters that
Okay,
I've seen.
yeah.
So I should have
And
tried
so,
one of those on the Pi, but I didn't see the 1 billion version until after
yeah,
the episode. So
yeah, yeah. So that's enough for it to at least start the process. So yeah,
yeah.
fascinating. Would be curious to see sort of what exactly the level is of that lower language model, but yeah. So Red Dirt asks if would a server with Tesla GPUs work?
Yeah, I've got a Tesla P40, a little tiny card about that big, and it works with that. It's not especially fast, but it works pretty well.
Cool. Martin Griffiths. When it came to the Dell, why wouldn't you compare apples with apples and run against the 70 model?
I figured the 70 model on the 4080 was pretty much as fast as the thing was going to scroll anyway. Excuse me. So I thought that why not step up the ante at that point and get a more complex model running. But I could have run it just to see how much faster it was even still, I suppose. I just, for time, didn't think that was all that interesting, so I didn't do it. But people have asked, so maybe I should have.
Yeah, there's lots of suggestions on things they'd like to see and test this versus that, and I think some of that'll come in the questions too. So no shortage of specific sort of requests that folks are curious about.
Well, I love that. I mean, I can't do them all, but a lot of good ideas come out of that. So please throw them into the comments.
Yeah, keep chucking that stuff in there. Yeah, I mean, I pull the questions, but you look at all the stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Michael Parks. This is very interesting. Two questions he's got for you. Is the Goldilocks output the same each time? And then the second one is Olama pre-trained so that you can't train it yourself.
Uh, in answer to the first part, well, let me answer the second part first. No,
Yeah.
it is all pre-trained, but yes, you can, using RAG and using a knowledge context window, modify that base training so that you get a more custom tailored GPT for your use. And that's something else I'm going to be showing in the upcoming episode on the Dave's Garage channel, is how to add your documents to it, the easy way and the thorough way, and the various ways of doing it.
Right. Yeah. So then the other one, the Goldilocks output, is that the same each time?
Oh, no, even on the same model, it'll be different because I don't think they use the same seed each time. And certainly across models, you're going to get different answers, more thorough answers from the more thoughtful models.
Uh, W. Skinny Odin. That's what I'm calling him. Skinny Odin, maybe. Um, and there's a couple in here. So how much RAM does the system that ran the large model have present at the time? If it was not at least over 256 gig of RAM, that would mean the system was forced to swap virtual memory like there's no tomorrow.
Well, of course, I'm not silly. I wouldn't run it on something small with 256 gig of RAM. No, it has 512 gigabytes. So
Yeah, yeah,
it's a pretty healthy.
roughly twice that.
Yeah. And it did use just over 220 gigabytes during the run as I was watching it. So
And he's got another follow-up thing here. Do you miss the days of using computers with less RAM than actually needed to execute their tasks properly? And he references a Photoshop example where he's got a 300 DPI by 220 by 180 full color 10 later image and 64 megabytes of RAM. So he's talking about the image being uncompressed and needs more than 70 megs, and any filter takes like 30 minutes to run. So is that what we still refer to as the good old days? Or?
well, my Kim 1 has 1K. So if you go back far enough. The limits are pretty amazing, and I think even a upgraded Kim one was never usually more than 4K unless you had a system, like I do have a bus system where you can put in 32K memory cards and so on. But they were really memory constrained originally, as was the 4K PET and machines like that, and the Altair, of course. So it was fun. I don't know if it was fun. It was also frustrating, and it was very limiting in times to be working in an environment that constrained. But it also fostered a lot of creativity and some really cool solutions to how to do things with that little memory. So now complexity is the bugbear, I would think, that you have enough memory to hang yourself with effectively and make your system overly complicated and over engineered or inefficient and let the hardware compensate for it. But in those days, there was no hiding. So,
My only it harkens me back to my early days in the office and guys running AutoCAD in the landscape section. And I'm looking over the shoulder, sort of learning stuff, and I remember, oh yeah, okay, they're doing the drawing, and then they'd regen, and it's like, okay, we'll go for coffee.
yeah.
So you knew it was going to take 15, 20 minutes or half hour to regenerate the image, so it's okay, we'll go do something else. And our tolerance for waiting now seems to have shrunk severely in the last 30 years for sure.
Yeah, I should look up. I'm curious how long it took them to generate each frame when they did the original Toy Story. Because you could do that movie live now, I'm pretty sure, very close to it. Maybe with not quite the same lighting, ray tracing, but with a very good facsimile of it and run it live. And back then, I'm sure it was like measured in frames per hour, if that. So,
Yeah. Lord Devi, and I think that the three models that you referred to, I'm trying to remember, was one, it was 8 billion, 70 billion.
and
And then,
405.
yeah. So Lord Devi says, geez, what's even needed to run the 405 billion model?
Well, that was the machine with 512 gigabytes.
Oh, so you
Uh,
did load the full model on that
yeah,
one.
yeah, that's the one that was really slow, as
Oh, okay.
as slow as the Pi, but it was running on the best hardware. That was that one.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah. So there's your answer.
Yeah.
That's not the $50 model. That's the $50 model with a K at the end of it.
Yeah, I wonder if they can do ASIC based inference on these types of models and get faster output. Like, how does ChatGPT and how does Bing, whatever OpenAI or whatever Microsoft calls it, Copilot, how do they generate pretty snappy responses on some very large models?
So ASIC based inference.
Yeah, the chip's dedicated just to do inference on the PC, not
Okay.
to build the models. To build the models, you need GPUs and tons of memory and
Right. Oh, okay.
farms of
Okay.
computers. But to run the model, you can do it on your local machine, as I showed. But you can also have dedicated hardware that's built just for doing inference on a model like that.
And farms of models again. Being the prairie boy, I'm like, how did how did like a Quonset full of GPUs all of a sudden become a farm? I don't know. Maybe that's how. Maybe they are stored in Quonsets. Sorry. Yeah, I'm easily distracted by squirrels. Um, Simon JM, I'd be curious about the actual results. Did each of the run of the same question produce the exact same output?
No, did not.
Yeah. And
And in
that's again,
fact,
you
there was
talked
a
about the different
significant,
seed.
yeah, the seed is the one thing, and then the complex models would produce longer, more thoughtful analysis.
Okay. And Sean Gibson, this is a question I think he was looking for help from anyone, but we're going to throw it at you. Does anyone know how easy it would be to use something like this to provide captions for images?
You would need a image to text model, which you can get at Hugging Face. There's probably many of
Yeah.
them. So you would run that model and feed it an image. Now, if he means video captions, I don't know if there's a video to text model. You could
Yeah, he
probably do
said
the audio
images.
to
So,
text, I would guess.
yeah.
So, yeah, if you're doing images and you want to categorize and get it to produce a caption just for an image, I would imagine that the image to text models can do that now locally as well.
And so there's a model we can type text prompts in and it'll generate an image. It's not simply the inverse of that, is
No,
it? It's a, yeah. Um, Oz 2, stupid test, but what would a LLM do if it was trained only on stock market data? Any idea?
I'm sure it's been done. And I've always wondered if an AI is yet able to predict market patterns by feeding it, up to the minute data. They have obviously massive amounts of historical data that you could pump through, and you would hope that the model could at least detect cyclical patterns based on human behavior, like January effect or things like that. In terms of technical stuff, whether it can predict the move of a stock based on everything it knows from reading every stock quote ever, I would tend to think it probably can, but I haven't seen anybody doing it. And I mean,
Although
obviously, anybody who can do it will be quiet about it, and then pretty soon you'll have perfect information again. And
although the past performance is no indication of future. Yeah.
yes, this is not investment advice.
Yeah, and it can predict based on past performance, but that's not necessarily always the only and sole predictor. I was driving home from work today and sort of getting ready for tonight. The other thing that's along these lines popped in my head about, so you're building your own local language model. You're putting in the information that you want to put into it. How narrow can you sort of make that information, and how biased can you make that information where the model starts to just sort of present you with stuff that you're sort of seeking and training it to produce for you? Is that a
Well, models can be really tiny. One of the ones that I've tinkered with a bit is it's a set of digits from the post office with a whole bunch of handwriting samples for each letter of the alphabet. And you train the model on just letters of the alphabet as handwritten, and that's all it can do. You can ask it about cats, and it doesn't know a cat from a dog,
right?
but it's really good at text writing or at text recognition. Um, so that to answer that question, your model can be incredibly specific. And if you did a text large language model and only fed it documents of a certain type, then it would base all of its context, knowledge, and processing on that smaller set of documents.
So you've been playing around with the post office model or with your own model of recognizing handwriting?
Yeah, I bought a book, Deep Learning with Python,
Okay.
and been kind of going through that. So it's very slow.
Of course you have. Yeah, haven't we all? Yeah, I just haven't cracked mine open yet. That's why.
Oh, it's new.
Yeah, the handwriting stuff is quite neat again, and sort of the work that I do. That with cursive writing. I mean, my kids can't read cursive writing, and they're 19 to 25, so that's a challenge. And my stuff that's uh, pretty important. Yeah, the narrow learning piece of it is so. So if you've got a narrow model, whether it's a post office model, and all it knows is how to recognize postal codes or zip codes, and you ask it about cats and dogs, does it say, "I know nothing about cats and dogs," or is it try to politely come up with some guesstimate, or is it just dumb
No,
for
a
that
model like
question?
that might give you the guess of the letter V. I have, if that's
Okay, yeah,
really it's n nodes, it only has so many possible outputs, and it's not made to generate text, right? So now,
that's right. Yeah,
if you had a language model and you fed it stock market data, I don't know that that's going to be incredibly useful. So it has to be a model designed to process that type of information.
right. Yeah, and it wouldn't know much about cats and dogs either, would it? The stock market model. Yeah.
No, it wouldn't have any context for that.
But
So,
you wouldn't be asking it. So what the hell? Move on to the next question, dummy.
all right.
Uh, Luc de Sormeau. This is pretty awesome. Having this local would be great. My question is there a model that can locally create images?
Yes.
This is, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have
No,
more
no,
questions?
no. I was just chatting on. He's got a whole bunch of other lovely comments about how we do it. I'll just leave that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, stable diffusion is a very common one. That's something I've run on the local machine to play with and use the GPUs and the Dell workstation. And it generates an image, in under 10 seconds type speed. So, and that's at 1024 or 1920 by 1080, I think I was at. Um, so it's a good model. And then there are tons of models at Hugging Face. But I think the easiest one to set up is stable diffusion. And that might be worth doing an episode on as well, actually.
Yeah. And are there again different libraries, different models that you can load into that as well to
Yeah,
get
there's
different
basically
types of
two levels.
results?
You can get all kinds of different retrained models. So people start with something like stable diffusion, and then they do more tuning on that model, and then it's good at drawing Japanese anime or something, and now you've got the
Right.
Japanese
Yeah.
anime model.
Yeah. Specialized stuff. This is really going to go wild in the next little while. I can't wait for a lot of this stuff. Though I'm not sure we as a society are fully ready for it. Brian McCullough, what real world, you did throw a tongue twister around me there, bugger. What real world use cases can we do with these AI models on a normal desktop with just a gaming GPU?
Well, I could write your homework for you. It can solve programming tasks.
Yeah.
It can do all those things with just a gaming GPU. Like the 4080 is a fairly good gaming GPU, but it was very fast. So if you had a half as good GPU, I'm sure it's half as fast, and
And
that's
again,
still pretty useful.
just the gaming GPU. A lot of folks, if you've got a gaming GPU, you're running a pretty solid machine for.
Yeah, I would think if you've got a 20 series card, it's at least useful
Yeah,
as long as it's got more memory. If you've got an 8 gig card, that's a little rough, but
yeah.
it still probably works. But I didn't try that.
Um, Detlef Moeller. I think the next video should be on how to train it on your own data. Let's say a simple Microsoft Access local database. And I think you've talked about that. You've got a couple ideas floating around that you're going to look at some of those options, eh?
Yeah, the only thing I don't know about that is when you feed documents into the model, it generally has to go through what's known as a text transformer. To transform your input text into something
Right.
useful for the model to then process. And it can do PDF and it can do doc files, but I don't know about Microsoft Access database files. So you would need something to read those files or export
Yeah.
them to some format that it could read.
Yeah. I wonder if it could understand. So if you exported them as tables and some sort of relationship, the relational database and how those tables are connected, could it glean the information from that?
Yeah, if you printed out a table
Yeah.
diagram, even a picture of
Yeah.
one, ChatGPT can process that.
Yeah. So if you exported your tables and then gave it the structure of how those tables connect, the relationship between them, then it should be able to
Yeah,
configure
I'm
that,
sure
some
that
knowledge
depends.
around that.
That depends in part on how big the database is and what you're going to ask it. I don't know how
Yeah,
deep of knowledge it can extract from
yeah,
raw
yeah.
data like that, but
Yeah.
I haven't tried it
We,
either. So.
yeah, we might try that. Um, dark matter. Is there a way to publish this local language model internally on an Internet Information Service or IIS website so the family can use it within my LAN?
Yeah, I actually published mine on the internet and gave it to family members and let them run it. So, but you have to know the port number and a password. So that's the easiest way. Internally, it's very easy. It should be running on the one machine, and just you can go to it's usually port 3000 or 8080, depending on what you're running on that machine in your browser, and it should come up.
Which reminds me, full disclosure, Dave allowed me to set up a password on that.
Yeah.
And I was so excited. I just smashed in some password and I can't remember it.
I could probably
So,
reset your
so,
account.
so I have to ask for a password reset. So I tried a couple times and I thought, oh, maybe he just meant me to use it for that one day and I'm locked out. But anyway, now that I've got the pressure of the entire YouTube world on it, then I'll leverage a password reset out of you. Brandy Balloon. Off topic, but WSL, shouldn't it be LSW, the next subsystem for Windows? The for Windows part means it runs on Windows. It just sounds backwards to me.
But it is a Windows subsystem. So there are subsystems on Windows that define the operating system's personality. There was an OS2 subsystem. There's a Windows subsystem. There was a POSIX subsystem, which has kind of grown and evolved to be the Linux subsystem. And
Okay.
they all run on top of the NT kernel. And so they're independently loaded. I believe you can start and stop them, except the Windows one requires WinLogon to be running at all times. So the Windows one has to be running. I believe the other ones can start and stop. So in that
So
sense, it really is the Windows subsystem for Linux.
there's that gray bearded wizard historical information where the Windows subsystem for Linux was not the first Windows subsystem.
Right.
Right. I like that kind of stuff. There's a lot of that around. It's neat. At Clomoc, hey, your downloads are pretty quick. How fast is your internet? And I know you've talked about this a few times, but just lay it on us one more time.
5 gigabits up and down. I had terrible internet forever, so I make no apologies for having amazing internet now. But
I was just going to say you tolerated some bad upload speeds for quite a long time for a guy at your caliber of technology. So
yeah, especially because I upload everything in 4K, and so those are 5 gigabyte files, and it would take an hour, hour and a half to upload each time, and that's just a pain. So now it's fairly fast.
That's even longer than regenerating an AutoCAD document 30 years ago. That
Yeah,
you could
back
do in
then it
15
took
or
about an
20
hour to
minutes.
render. I'm sorry, it took an hour to render, and then it took an hour and a half to upload. So just doing a test to see what it looks like on YouTube was a 2.5 hour ordeal. So much nicer now with a faster Mac and better uploads. Oh, guess what? I got Starlink today too. So
Oh, no way. Holy cow.
I should
Had
get that
you,
installed next week. And,
how long was that in the works for?
um, I ordered it probably 3 weeks ago, and it showed up at some point in the last couple of weeks.
Wow.
So I already have, I have fiber as the main internet, and then I have
Yeah.
cellular as a backup in case somebody cuts the cable or the phone goes down or power goes out or whatever. And everything works without power too, the fiber so far. But the cell phones around here don't last more than about a day because they're run with batteries on the cell phone towers, and those only have about a day's worth of backup, it seems. So last time we had an extended power outage here, we had no cell service. And now I don't have a landline because they made me give it up when I got fiber. And so I'm a little sketchy about that. And Starlink, fortunately, is completely independent. And because I have backup power and a view of the sky, I should be able to get internet from that baseline. as opposed to being
Oh,
dependent on fiber or the cell phone service. So.
and so that's the primary reason behind you getting the Starlink, and then the other thing of it's there, and now you have an excuse to sort of play around with it and test it and
Yeah, but it's primarily
push it.
as an emergency backup
Yeah,
for extreme circumstances.
excellent, excellent. Okay, we're moving off of the $50 language model now to kernel mode. Um, Jonathan Melancon, are you using a prompter or are you superhuman?
I use a prompter for most episodes. Yes,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
here, but
not for shop talk. Yeah, yeah. So you're sort of superhuman? No,
nope, not at all.
not at all.
I can't believe
Uh,
that people can read the news and do it right every day and not, have to do 3 hard cuts during each segment. So YouTube is very
yeah,
forgiving of the hard cut, which is nice.
yeah. They're just a news reader. Yeah, give it a try.
Right.
Yeah, looks that's why they do it because they make it look like it's easy. Fred Jacobowitz, sorry, Fred Jacobowitz. Does the operating system run in both user mode and kernel mode?
Yes. So for an example, when you call create window, that's going to happen on the user side in user 32 DLL up to a certain point, up to it needs an actual window handle to be created or something that it needs to have on the kernel side. And then it will make that service call or the kernel transition to do the work on the kernel side and come back to you. But you try to resist mode changes from kernel to user or user to kernel as much as possible because there is a certain amount of expense with it. So if you're on the user side, you want to do everything you can in user side. And if you're on the kernel side, you probably want to stay in kernel mode as much as you can. But a lot of those APIs, of course, have to cross that boundary, and
Yeah,
they do so.
yeah. It's always active. Not necessarily how active it is depends on what the function is going on and what it's getting called to do from the user mode, right?
Right.
Yeah. Neil Rick, I thought that Unix employed a monolithic kernel, whilst Linux deployed a modular kernel. Am I wrong, or did I just hear a slip of the tongue?
No, it's monolithic, but it is also modular. So it's not a microkernel by any stretch. Everything is
Okay.
in the kernel, but file systems and drivers can be independently loaded as modules and then unloaded. So it's like little parts around the kernel can come and go, but the kernel's still big and includes pretty much everything.
Like compartmentalized, maybe, sort of?
Internally and in an architecture, I'm sure it is, but it's all running
Right,
in the same protection
right.
ring, so
Yeah,
it's got
yeah.
access to itself. Now there's C groups and there's other ways to limit access in kernel mode so you don't have, say, one container mess with another, that kind of thing. But
Yeah, right. Okay. Marsovac. Hey, Dave, will you cover the new 9.9 severity unauthenticated remote code execution Linux vulnerability when more details are revealed?
yeah, actually, I should make that the episode thumbnail. 9.9 security breach. Do the Linus Tech Tips thumbnail.
I'm not aware of
Uh,
that one.
Which one? Oh, it's a new
The
Linux one,
9.9.
and it requires
Okay.
just a UDP packet sent to the machine on a particular
Okay.
port. Then you can do remote code execution. But the catch is only when that server or machine goes to do a print job, is my current understanding. So it attacks the print subsystem, but I think printing has to be part of the process at some point.
So again, this is a little bit outside or a lot outside. So we're talking now again about print drivers. And those running in user mode but needing access to the kernel. Is that another? Sounds like a vulnerability. This isn't the first time that's been utilized as a
Yeah,
as
this
a
actually
vulnerability.
is not in a driver. It's in a web
Oh,
or a
okay.
network service for
Oh,
printing.
okay.
And so it actually probably happens in user mode, but it gives you the user can execute code. And once you can do that, you can probably promote yourself and get different
Okay.
groups and get access to being administrator, basically.
I see. Okay, now we're getting into the shop talk questions here. And again, SERPs with it might be SERPs.
Why are there 7 S's on the end or what?
Well, yeah, I stretched it a bit long. I was being a bit. It's just 3 S's.
Oh, okay.
And I think again he's sort of looking for a question to everybody. Where we're going to chuck it at you. Which retro architecture, PC or console, would you recommend for someone wanting to learn the fundamentals of hardware and software interaction, and why? And he gives a couple of examples, like an Atari 65 XE or Commodore 64.
Yeah, I would actually say the Commodore 64. It's good because the 6502 is a great chip. It requires that you be very economical in your code, and it's sometimes a pain to write for because everything is strictly 8-bit. except for 0-page pointers. And it can be frustrating that way, but you learn a lot about the machine. The memory map is really small. You can keep it in your head. There's a kernel for kernel in a different sense, just kind of like a kernel of system services to do things like printing output or opening a disk file and all that. So you can interact with those. There's the basic interpreter that you can interact with. The 64 has a pretty nice video chip that you can do raster interrupts and say, I want to change colors at the particular line of the screen. So you get to learn that kind of thing. You get sprites and you get digital sound. Well, waveform generation of, it's like triangle, sine, square, and noise or something, if I recall. But the machine is powerful enough for its day, and it's powerful enough that you can do stuff with it, but it's simple enough to understand. And I think that was a nice nexus point for the Commodore 64.
And that was the spot that hit little Dave Plummer when he was, what, 13 years old or something?
Yeah, about that. Well, I was a little older, but for this Commodore 64, I'd always wanted a TRS-80 because that's what I initially ran into. Right. And then got a 64 when I was 15 or so. And yeah, then I was well set in my ways.
That's the one that really set you off on your path. Eh? And it's funny you mentioned the audio part. Every time I think of the Commodore 64, I think of loading up my floppy disk just to load and play that 7-second snippet of everybody was kung fu fighting.
Oh yeah.
Neat. Couldn't even finish the tune, but I'm gonna have to Google that after this just to hear it again and refresh my mind. So
yeah, it was an impressive demo. Thinking about the 64, actually, that is the last thing anybody ever bought for me, really, because my parents bought the Commodore 64 on a disk drive, and then eventually I used that to write code that got me an Amiga, and I used the Amiga to get an Amiga 2000. I used the Amiga 2000 to get the job at Microsoft, and then so on and so forth. So it all really does stem from the Commodore 64.
And you still have your Commodore 64 sitting in your office?
No, right? I don't. I have a similar, identical one, same color and everything else, but it is not mine. I lost some of my hardware when we moved houses, and or when we got rid of the addition above the garage, or we built an addition above the garage, and that meant all the stuff that was stored up in the garage had to go. And we had a dumpster, and I'm like, I can't believe I would throw away old hardware, but when an Amiga is like 14 years old and it's just kind of a paperweight and there's no nostalgia yet, it might have gone out that way, yeah.
So you had brought the stuff from Regina into Washington then. Oh, it was the last move from the previous house in
the software that I'd written. This is the original one here, and this is one I did in college later. And when I moved to Seattle here to work for Microsoft, I was still doing the hypercache thing. So I had an Amiga, and I was duplicating floppies for it and the whole works. So still had an Amiga at home.
Yeah, the stories I remember here, just running the duplicating all the CDs and then stuffing them into boxes and seal wrapping them and dragging a box of stuff down to the post office to mail out these things. It was like a little assembly line you had set up in your house between you and your wife and whatever friends and family you could cajole into helping you with that stuff.
Yeah, I remember talking to my dad because when I first went to print these up, I got them done at the university print shop. And it's pretty simple. It's like a cardboard mailer with 10 pages of documentation inside. And then it gets shrink wrapped separately. But I said I was going to get 10 or 20 made up. And he was like, you better start with 5. He was not a big risk taker. So I sold all 10, though, not to worry.
And how long did it take to sell the first 10?
Didn't take very long. I remember Nikki had a cell phone in her car, and this is in the days of, remember Danny Glover in, what's the movie with him and
Mel Gibson?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Oh, we're gonna.
Anyway, he's carrying around a giant suitcase phone, with the handle and everything else. And she had one of those where it was trunk mount, and then you had the handle or the handpiece in the car. And I got a call to call this number. So I called it, and it was one of the big software distributors, and they wanted to order, I think, 50 copies, which was a big deal because, $20 a copy wholesale, it's like $1,000. So when you're in college and somebody calls and says, I want $1,000 of your stuff, I was pretty stoked. So we had to produce them all and then shrink wrap them all. And
so she had a cell phone in the car. So that's back when you had to run a wire and screw a little.
Yeah, it had that little big tail antenna on the glass. Yeah, they had to go through the glass, I think.
Holy cow.
Unless they had an inductive thing. I don't know.
Sort of why she put that in her car? She wanted a cell phone in her car?
Her dad put it in.
Oh.
And I think it was, looking after his daughter. And
Yeah,
he had
yeah,
access to
yeah.
them through work, so got a deal on one. And
Wow. Wow, that's pretty slick. So this is when, like 89 or 90 or something?
late '80s, yeah,
Wow. Holy cow.
yeah, '89 probably.
Um, is Llama self-install LLM subject to the same whole woke stuff, woke biases that ChatGPT and Claude have?
I don't find the current Chat GPT certainly bad. I mean, it. I guess I'm not asking it controversial stuff because I'm mostly asking about programming and research stuff. I'm not trying to push its edges. It really depends who trained the model to answer the
Yeah,
question. So if
right.
it's the Facebook meta model, it's probably going to conform to Facebook standards and practices and their user experience. And but you can get models built and trained by other people that are not quite as big and powerful, but probably have no guardrails whatsoever. So
Yeah,
there
and
are
I guess
no Olama, I believe, doesn't build in any limitations. It depends on the model entirely and who trained the model and what guardrails they put upon it.
yeah. And I think that's sort of what I was getting to earlier. If you're building your own model and you can feed it. If you can feed it to be as woke as you want it to do, or or as not woke as you want it to be, in whatever uh, realm of the spectrum that you want it to be on, you can feed it that stuff, and that's what it'll learn from, and that's what it'll feed back to you. So
Yeah, I think ChatGPT 3 or was it 3.5? Because when I was writing my book, I would use it to check some of my assertions. Like, here's what I'm saying. Is this true? And oh, you can't say it like that, Dave. And it would get really concerned for no real reason because I was touching the topic of autism, right? And it got
right,
gun shy about that. So, but now with ChatGPT 4, it will give you a much more thoughtful analysis without just saying, "Oh, I can't talk about that."
right, right.
I'm sure there's stuff that it won't, but
Dave, are you going to update your channel photo now that your beard has gone? He says a lot whiter. I'll say
it's bright white, man.
more to the gray tone of wisdom. Yeah.
It used to be hickory bronze, and now it's summer sunset. Yes. Yeah, probably should update the channel photo. I'll wait till I lose another 10 pounds. I've lost a little bit. So get back to the same head shape, and then I'll just have the color change.
Yeah, it'll just fade out. It's funny, and I'll tell you this. I a few years ago we were chatting. I think, and I'm colorblind, so I don't sort of notice this stuff. But one day I noticed that your beard looked different, and I think I made a comment about, "Oh, do you color your beard?" And like, "Oh yeah." And then that was like the last time I remember you colored your beard. And I still got this thing in my head that somehow, when I mention that, kind of just because I say what's on my mind, that somehow you stopped coloring your beard because I said that. So I've sort of felt like it's been my fault the whole
No, I
time.
thought actually it was because I stopped coloring my beard. You asked about it, so I don't know of the order, but
Okay, okay. Well, we'll both assume that we're each at fault, or that it's the other guy's problem, and we'll just leave it at that. But
well, the funny part is a beard like this will grow out in 2 weeks, right? I can shave it bald, and it's only this long, so it'd grow
yeah,
right back. But when you stop coloring it in like 2 weeks, you go from brown to white. And so when you're doing videos every week, you just show up one week with a white beard, and people are like, "What the hell happened to this old man?"
now you've prompted another thing from me. So shaving it bald. I mean, you've only done that once,
Yes. That was long ago at Microsoft. And I had got, it was 96 because I went to Networld Interop and I did a talk with Jim Olsen. He was doing the keynote and we were demoing Media Center. And I went home and I got the video from the library, the Microsoft library, to see what it looked like and see myself and on stage and how it would look like. And I did not care for just, the fireman look with just a mustache. And so I'm like, well, that really sucks. I got to change that. So I just went upstairs and shaved it off, which didn't affect me because I grew up with my face in the mirror. I knew what I looked like.
right?
My wife, however, who did not, had really only ever known me with facial hair because when she came home, she walked in the door, looked at me, and just burst out crying. Not the biggest vote of confidence, but
oh, I could just hear that story. Yeah, that's at least the third time I've heard it, but I knew what I was getting into when I prompted it. I just, well, I mean, and it has nothing to do, but I shaved my head for 20 years, and then as experiments started to go here, now it's irritated the heck out of me. I wanted to shave it, yeah, and I go downstairs a couple of weeks or month ago and say, I'm going to cut my hair again. And one of my daughters and my wife are like, oh, no, we like the hair. And I'm like, God dang it, now I got to keep this stupid hair. So I don't know what I'm doing, but that's okay. That's the trials and tribulations of being a husband and a father, right?
it reminds me of my dad because he had a real black beard. He would have to shave like twice a day. If he was going to the bank, he would shave in the morning and come home and shave in the afternoon before going to the bank,
Right.
so he didn't have 5 o'clock shadow. And when he was, at some point terminally ill at the end of his life, I was kind of bugging him. Why don't you grow a mustache? See what it looks like. He was like, never. It's like, so he had never had facial hair in his life, and I never saw him with it, even though he had like the fastest growing beard that I ever saw.
Yeah, neat. That's all we got for questions. I think before we sort of hand it back to you, I think there's just a couple folks again with the folks here. They got questions. Put them in the comments. Throw a question mark in them. That's what I look for. And also, again, I'm pulling them from the other episodes. So the folks that are watching here on Dave's Attic and the ones that are watching on Dave's Garage, same thing. You poke your questions in. The one ask I'd have, I guess, is folks that are sort of popping in here from Dave's Garage is hit a subscribe on the Attic channel too, so you can get connected into that. So
yeah, you don't want to miss out on this top tier stuff. So
that's right.
Better turn on the bell too, I guess. Then.
Yeah, well, it's top tier stuff. I mean, they do have to tolerate me, but they're still getting some top tier stuff in there in between my questions. So
that's why they're smashing that like button. I'm told, smashing them. All right.
Anyways, I'll hand it back to you, Dave, and we'll wrap her up.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. And in the meantime and in the meantime, hope to see you next time right here on Shop Talk. There you go.